Hello, everyone. You are in for a treat with this episode. I had the privilege of sitting down with former CEO of the Canada Homestay Network, CHN, which is the largest umbrella for hosting international students in Canada. If you are interested in becoming a host family for a student, there are many opportunities that you can participate in. Host families can get paid for opening their homes. You have a team of support from CHN that will help you during your hosting experience. And most importantly, you will gain a cultural experience and friendship with someone who is studying and learning here in Canada. If you are interested in becoming a host family, or if you're just curious about the International Homestay Program, you can visit their website, www.canadahomestaynetwork.ca. I'll include the link in our show notes, and without further ado, here is our episode. Thanks for listening.
I like salad. Do you like salad?
Welcome to Canadian Salad,
A fun, factual, and friendly podcast about culture and integration in Canada.
I'm one of your hosts. I'm Ho Shen Ho from China, currently living in Vancouver, unceded territory of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations.
And I'm your other host, Andrea McCoy. I'm an immigrant from the United States and broadcasting you from the unceded traditional territory of the Lekwungen people, the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations.
And you're listening to Canadian Salad.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another Canadian Salad, another Tuesday. I hope you are all staying well and warm. Maybe some of you are warm and your snow is all melted, but at least in BC, we are experiencing a nice little blizzard tundra here. I am sitting here virtually, unfortunately not in person, with an amazing woman, a person I met not too long ago, but has a heart of gold and a experience and background that I think I know all of you will really enjoy listening. With me, I have Jennifer Robin Wilson, who is the author of The Heart of the Homestay, Creating Meaningful Connections When Hosting International Students. Jen, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so honored to have you.
It's such a pleasure to be here, Andrea. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I was connected to you by, I think, a mutual connection that we had. And she had said, oh, you should connect with Jen. She's hosted international students here in Canada for years. And I thought, oh my gosh. And so then when we met, I was like, oh, kindred spirit, same heart, and just really beautiful. So I was like, I need to have her on the podcast because I think hosting and hospitality is one thing in your home, but I think it really transcends to a bigger picture and a bigger posture that I think more of us need to integrate into our lives. So maybe before we dig into some questions, I know I've given you ahead of time, I would love if you would give us maybe a brief introduction of yourself, maybe where you grew up, how you got into hosting international students, and maybe even a little plug about your book.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So forgive me. I grew up in Toronto.
You're okay. You're forgiven.
Yeah. And I've lived in Victoria for 22 years. So
Okay.
I really call Victoria home. And my great grandparents settled here in Victoria, actually. So I have pretty deep roots in the city.
Wow.
And I got into homestay, honestly. As they say, my mother, Robin, started our family business called Canada Homestay Network in 1995. So we're celebrating our
Wow.
30-year anniversary this year.
Oh my gosh, huge.
Yeah. So she began the business when I was in university, and she was asked by a local private language school in Toronto to run their homestay program. They had been operating in Vancouver at the time and were opening a new campus and needed somebody who knew hospitality and understood how to help people, how to find people and how to help people. They found her through the bed and breakfast that she was running out of our family home at the time.
Wow, what an entrepreneur your mom was. Goodness.
It's true. So all through high school, I was used to having strangers in my house. They weren't international students, but they were certainly people from around the country and the US and other places who were coming to stay. anyway, she was approached by the school, and at first she said no. She'd never even heard of Homestay. She didn't know what it was.
Really? Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
And they persisted. They came back like a month or two later and said, "We really think you would be good at this, and we really want you to do this." So she took them up on the opportunity, thinking she would be able to place some students with some friends, and that would be the end of it. She would continue with her B&B and do this off the side of her desk. And before too long, there were way too many students for her to be able to match just among her friends. And the business just grew and grew. One of my first jobs in university as a summer student was for the family business. And I started working full time in the business in 2005. And then I retired in 2022. So just a couple of years ago, I stepped away from my CEO role to focus on my writing career and my coaching and consulting career. So I now have a coaching and consulting business, and I've got a book coming out, as you said.
Yes, yes.
Yay. Yeah. So the book is really a culmination of my experience working in homestay for over 20 years. And it's intended for host families to help them make the most of their experience. So I've collected data that we've done as an organization over the years, research that I've conducted on everything from psychology to neuroscience to cross-cultural communication, and dozens of interviews that I did for the book of hosts and students. So it's a collection of stories. We learn best through storytelling. So
yes, we do. Yes.
So there's lots of stories about hosts and students from both perspectives. And the stories are intended to help host families understand the benefits and challenges and how to navigate them in order to have a great experience.
Wow. Wow. Well, I feel like my introduction really sold you short. I'm very sorry about my introduction. I should have had something more planned. But no, that's incredible. So is the business still going? Is there
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So my parents and I are the board of directors, and we have promoted two people from within the company to become the new co-CEO. So I'm not involved in the day-to-day operations anymore, but we still own the business and still obviously have a interest in its success, as you can imagine.
Yes, for sure. For sure. When you were having people from other parts of the world in your home, and eventually that became international students, was there anything that stood out to you when you were younger, when that was happening? And from that, did any of those realizations or impacts change as you became an adult with more experience or whatnot? Or did it stay the same?
Yeah, it's a good question. Absolutely, there were shifts and evolution. So first, I'll qualify it. When we hosted students after my mom started the business, we often were taking in students who needed respite. So they were between families. We had to keep a vacant room open for those sorts of emergencies.
Okay.
So there were a couple of occasions where we had a student on arrival who stayed throughout their whole length of stay and then went home. But most of the time they were temporary, like they were only there for a night or two. So that kind of qualified my experience. I wasn't as connected or bonded to them the way that you would be if you were matched with a student who was coming for the entire length of stay. Yeah. And the things that stood out as a teenager, sort of young adult, were how much fun it was to cook with students and learn new recipes, helping them learn English. It was really easy to get along with them. If you just have an open mind and a sense of humor, it was fun. I only remember good things about it.
Yeah.
And then as I became an adult and was a parent myself and started hosting students as a young mother, I noticed how much more work the host has to do. Then I was really focused on, they're not clearing the table or doing their dishes. And those are the things that matter to
me. The
me.
Momness came out. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
A little bit.
And I think that's one of the big messages of my book, is that for the host siblings, there's a 50-50 kind of relationship. But as host parents, it's not. Hosts have to go the extra mile. They really need to be putting more effort in than the student, at least initially, in order to create the optimal conditions for a great relationship. So there's a lot of mentoring and support that's needed to help those students make the most of their experience. So I mentioned dishes, for example. I had a couple of Japanese students who stayed with me when I was pregnant with my second child and had a toddler running around the house. And I really needed them to help with the dishes. So I showed he was a Japanese teenager, and I showed him how to use the soap and run the tap and what I wanted him to do. And I went away from the kitchen to get some other chore done. And when I came back a few minutes later, the sink was almost full to overfull. Like it was just about going to slop over onto the floor. Because he just kept the water running. He didn't turn it on and off, and he didn't open the drain to let the water out. So, and I just made an assumption that he would know what to do. And it was a big moment. It's actually a little anecdote I share in the book about how I needed to just pause and slow down and take the time and not assume that these kids knew what I expect them to know as a 16-year-old boy. Yeah, that's an example of the kind of thing that you can't make assumptions, and you need to go a little bit further than just assuming.
Yeah, exactly. Which, were there any instances where maybe that student or another student had assumptions about, maybe it was hard to capture, but did they have any assumptions about their host family or even about you that you experienced? Oh my gosh, I didn't know you expected me to do that. Do you have an example? You're shaking your head.
Yeah, less so for me personally. Again, I didn't have a ton of hosting experiences. After I was hosting with my toddler, that wasn't long after that I joined the company and started working. So I, again, had to keep my spare room open for those emergencies.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
But one of the examples that just came to mind when you said that was students who come from particular cultures where they're raised to focus exclusively on their studies, and they're not expected to do anything around the house. And I think this is one of the really big adjustments that Canadian hosts have to make, where they have these teenagers arrive who, like in my case, have no concept of helping out around the house. And at first, that can be construed as rude or unhelpful or entitled. And in fact, it's not that at all. It's just that they don't know. Yeah.
Which I'm sure there's probably Canadian-born teenagers who also think, "Oh, mom, I'm not going to do anything." Or, but no, you're right. Just that I think, in just my work with people from other parts of the world, as much as I have assumptions about them, they have assumptions about me. And I think that, like you said, it's easy to forget that it's a two-way street. Whatever we think or assume, there's probably just an equal assumption on their end, right? Because we all have our filters, and it's not wrong. It's just, that's what we do naturally as humans, right?
That's right.
Yeah. I'm wondering, in navigating, because you mentioned even the water in the sink, but there's also other cultural differences that are maybe night and day. I remember most of the students in my master's program were from China, and I learned the power of collectivism in the sense of they would wait for me to pack up my backpack before we went down to lunch. Whereas that was not the experience from Western raised people. It was like, you just go, I'll meet you down there. But there was this cultural difference of, no, we're going down together. So I'm just curious, in those experiences, I think culturally we may not have, not all of us are maybe born with that curiosity or even that unassuming nature, or just that, even just that interest in other cultures. I think sometimes those differences become the polarization that we allow for us not to look beyond the person or their culture, or just seeing them as regular people who just have a different way about doing things. I'm wondering, how did you navigate that coexistence with other cultures, specifically maybe in the home, but even in working with other hosts or people from different countries?
Yeah. There's 3 strategies that I recommend in the book, and I'd like to talk about each of them as ways to think about how to get along with students, but I think that they apply to everyday situations as well. So the first is to treat the student like family. The second is to learn about culture, which you're talking about right now. And the third is to learn about yourself. So when I talk about treating the student like family, when you're hosting a family member, you can imagine like a long lost cousin comes to stay with you for a week or two. You're going to just imagine how you would behave in that way, right? All the choices you make come from a place of love and belonging and wanting to hospitality and wanting to make that person feel welcome and part of the family. You go the extra mile without thinking about what you're getting paid or whether or not you're the person to do this or whether they'll appreciate you or any of that stuff. You just do it. And I think that's necessary in homestay too. To get off to the right start, you have to begin with trust, which is one of the things that you do when you have family come. You have to set boundaries and you have to normalize discomfort. And I think it's hard to do any of those things with strangers, which is why if you don't think about them as a stranger, one of my favorite quotes in the book is from a host named Lori who says, people ask me, how can you bring strangers into your home? And I say, they're only a stranger for the first 5 minutes.
That's beautiful.
And I just love that. I was like, it's true.
It's true. Yeah, it's very short-lived.
Just give them the benefit of the doubt and treat them as individuals and all those good things. So how does that translate into your everyday life? Obviously, I'm not saying treat every person you meet like they're long lost cousin, but you can be respectful and give people the benefit of the doubt and see people, like you're saying, it's our common humanity. It's everyone deserves love and a sense of belonging no matter where they're from. So that's how treating the student like family translates to interactions with anybody. The second thing I said was to learn about culture. And I think one of the misconceptions that our hosts have, and that I think a lot of people in general, is that in order to get along with someone, you have to learn all the rules of their culture. Like you just gave that example of the Chinese students and the collectivist kind of approach to society. Yeah, now you know that rule, but you can't possibly learn all the rules about all the cultures. And
correct. Yeah.
It's impossible. Even if you're hosting and you have a Japanese student coming in a couple of months and you take a crash course in Japanese culture, obviously that would help and it's great, but that's not how we build cross-cultural competence. We build cross-cultural competence by learning to behave in ways that facilitate understanding. And I think that begins with understanding your own culture. And so you said that too. We don't know the rules that we know. We don't know how we were brought up because we've learned these things since we were kids. We learn them by behaving in ways that our parents and teachers and coaches expect us to. It's like lining up. So we in Canada learn to line up in kindergarten. And we continue to line up throughout our whole lives. You go to the post office, you go to the bank, you go to the library, like anywhere you go, you line up because that's how you were taught.
Yeah.
And there's lots of cultures around the world where people do not line up like we do.
No, it's true.
So that's an example. And it's hard to notice those rules unless you're presented with a contrast, like living or working with someone else or going to another country. So I had an experience in China when I was in Beijing a few years ago. I went to the Forbidden City as a good tourist. And
good job.
I was standing in line to buy my ticket, and it was one of these ticket booths that had they even had like metal railings to create like a lane for people that led to the booth. And so I was diligently standing in my lane behind the people in front of me. And when I got to the booth, there was a guy behind me who like walked right up next to me, and he was standing at the booth beside me while I was buying my ticket. And I was like, wow, that guy's really rude. What does he think he is? Until I realized in hindsight that this was not about him and his personality. It was about a cultural difference. Yeah. So that's an example of an interaction that we encounter on a regular basis with people from other cultures where we fail to see that culture is what's playing a role in their behavior. We gravitate very easily and quickly to attributing behaviors to an individual's personality or to a universal trait. But there's actually 3 layers of interaction. There's individual, there's cultural, and then there's universal. So use food as an example. At the universal level, we all need to eat as humans.
Sure.
At an individual level, we all have likes and dislikes, even allergies, right? And then at a cultural level, there's all the cuisines that you might enjoy, like Mexican food or Chinese food or Indian food. That's a really simple illustration of those 3 layers. And when dealing with cultural difference, the first mistake we make is our tendency to confuse cultural and universal traits. So like you said, I just assume that everyone knows that we're going to go down to the cafeteria separately.
Yeah.
So we don't notice our own culture. It's easy to assume that everyone shares our cultural norms. And we assume something that we do is universal, not cultural. So another example of that is in many cultures, when you're visiting somebody's home, the tradition or the expectation is that the host will offer you something to eat or drink, and you should say no. And then they'll offer it to you a second time, sometimes even a third time, and you shouldn't say yes until that second or third time it's offered. And that's out of respect and deference to the host from an age when food and water were scarce. And for you to say yes to a host who is offering you something to eat or drink, it meant that the host might go hungry or thirsty. So it was customary to say no. And so you can imagine if one of these students comes to Canada and their host offers them something to eat and they say no, you're only going to ask once. And the poor student is going to why didn't they offer me a second try? I'm really hungry.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
And likewise, you can make the same mistake if you're traveling abroad and a host offers you something, you say yes right away. They're going to think that you how rude is
exactly. Yeah.
The other mistake we make is to confuse the individual with the culture. When we see when we see someone behave in a way that we don't expect, we assume it's their personality. So like the guy in line beside me in China, I thought he was being rude when I didn't see that it was a cultural norm that he was performing. So we judge them without understanding them. Yeah. So I think all of that, like understanding how much culture infiltrates every single part of our lives. It's not just about clothes or the way you dress or the music you listen to. Like it's so many other things. It's all these unspoken rules about how we interact with each other. Yeah. And so understanding that is like step one. Understanding your own culture, of course, is step two. And then starting to behave in ways that facilitate understanding. And in this case, noticing when it could be culture and not individual or not universal.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that, obviously, is to be curious, like you said at the beginning, to ask lots of questions. I think people are reluctant to ask questions or to go there, so to speak, because they don't want to offend somebody.
Sure.
But I think people are probably more open to that than you realize. And if you're still uncomfortable, ask somebody else or go do your research or, like in our case, call your homestay coordinator.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it is interesting because in the times that I've traveled overseas, I would hate that someone had an experience with me where I messed up terribly and they just assumed, oh, all Americans are this way. That like how you're saying that individual versus cultural or individual versus that universal. It's so easy. I've hosted someone from Japan before. This next Japanese person will be just the same, but they're not. Because they were raised with very different parents, very different social structures, regions, environment. There's so many aspects that add to and create our own unique cultures. And I love what you said about understanding your own, because I feel like that is I feel like that's the undercurrent that has made us really displaced from understanding or being willing to appreciate other cultures because we don't even know our own. I think it wasn't just a few years ago that I learned about my indigenous Mexican heritage on my mother's side. And I didn't know concretely about that because I think, and this has to do with like land and just roots and things like that, that there is something when your ancestors do move, there is a sort of displacement that we find. And so for many of us in the Western world, I think because we are not in tune with maybe our roots at a very core level, then we try to fill in who we are with other things. And that might be like status, it might be recognition, it might be a title or belonging, but we aren't necessarily appreciative of the cultures that we came from because maybe many of us don't even know where they did come from and that appreciation for our own. So how are we supposed to, I think, in giving grace to maybe the anti-immigrant or the person who is opposed to engaging and being curious, sometimes I think there is just that displacement within ourselves. And we don't think about those things that make us us. Don't think about the beautiful, but sometimes even the terrible, and saying, you know what, I'm going to put all of this in one beautiful picture and say, this is me. So that when I see another picture in front of me, I can appreciate it because I've appreciated what I've seen in the mirror. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I do feel like there is something missing sometimes when we don't know who we are.
I absolutely agree. And I think one of the things you said that's really valuable and is worth repeating is that culture is not just set at a national level. Yeah. It's not, as you say, it's also regional, it's community-based, it's family-based, it's Yeah, it's all these things. And we learn these rules and all those different layers. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And likewise, I feel like we could unpack each of your chapters or topics. So
the
I know
third one, the third one is just to learn about yourself. And I'll just be brief. That basically means understand how you show up in the world and how that impacts others. So in the book, in that section, I talk about bias, difficult conversations, forgiveness, and second chances. So how do you approach these more challenging parts of hosting, and what does conflict look like in your family? Are you the kind of family that argues like hot and fast and bombastic, like noisy, and then you're chill after that? Or do things simmer under the surface and are unspoken? Like understanding how you are and how you interact with other people really plays a huge role in being able to get along with people from other cultures.
It's so true. And we do this in our own relationships and community all the time. If you have a partner, if you have kids, like we're always examining, the way I said this, they feel like I've just yelled at them and I haven't. I know I've experienced that with my son. I don't hear it, but he hears it through his own little lens. So why wouldn't other people with different backgrounds also have that kind of capacity? I think with so many shifts, and you capitalized on just that last piece of knowing who you are, I do feel like in our current situation with society and even with what's transpiring in the States, there is this bit of call to nationalism. I think when the tariffs were coming out from President Trump, everyone was like, we're Canadian, we are as Canadians. And all of a sudden there was a social identity of what it was to be Canadian. And it was coming against these tariffs and saying Canadian made and Canadian products and going back to who we are. And I've had people even comment on our social media. They're like, we're not against immigrants if they would just be like real Canadians. But there is this question mark of like that. We've attached this national identity to us. And I think you hit on a lot of these pieces, and even in your book, about what it is to be a global citizen. And I'm wondering if we are posturing ourselves to be good hosts and to be curious about the world around us, how do you navigate that national idea of identity with being a global citizen? Is it merely based on how you see yourself or how you see yourself with other people? Or should we even hold on to a national identity? And would that inhibit us from really expanding to a more global identity?
I think it's so interesting how we don't think a lot about our national identity until we're faced with these sorts of challenges, or it's the Olympics and we're all cheering for the Canadian athletes. Like
for sure. Yeah. We have no idea what the sport is. We're like, go Canada. Yeah.
And so that's just a funny sidebar, but for me, being a global citizen means seeing our common humanity. It's zooming up to that universal level while respecting the individual and the culture. And I think people smarter than me have said this better than I will, but humans migrate. It's what we do. It's what we've always done. Yeah. Not everyone owns a passport. I think it's something like 50% of Americans and 70% of Canadians actually own a passport. So we're not necessarily migrating a lot these days, but it's a remarkable fact that immigration has always been a part of our lives. And both Canada and the US, we're immigrants unless you're Indigenous.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
And my family's lived in Canada for 6 generations, but I don't think that makes me more or less of a citizen than someone who just arrived a year or two ago. We all belong here, and that's my kind of philosophy.
No, I love it. Louder for the folks in back.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think there is this idea of, and maybe this is where humanity and that kind of universal reaction that we have, that if it's the same in our minds, it's safe. If it's familiar, then I'm at ease with it. And that's how we adapted as human beings, right? We needed that. But when it comes to each other, and like you said, the difference between yourself 6 generations and someone who came here a year ago, there is still this universal, even though we might be different, we can still share and call ourselves a part of this country, even though longevity and time has nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really, I totally agree about the evolutionary aspect of the us versus them kind of dynamic that we naturally fall into. And I think it's really important to remember that even inside that evolutionary sort of protectionist, we didn't live in isolation. We had our community still. So
Mm-hmm.
humans are hardwired to live in community and to collaborate with each
Mm-hmm.
other and to connect with each other. And
Mm-hmm.
our default mode is not to fight with each other, it's to get along with each other. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
important to point that
Lean
out.
into the default.
We would
Yeah.
not have survived as people on the savannah if we didn't have each other.
It's so
Yeah.
true. It's so true. And we found each other without iPhones, right? We found each
Yes.
other without technology. We'll do it again if that goes into a volcano, which sometimes I wish technology would because it's so frustrating. But we do. And like you said, yeah, we're wired for that. And I think just to start wrapping up, I would love to know, Jen, just from your perspective, what do you think in being a global citizen, but even being in BC, in Canada, in your home, in your neighborhood, in your community, what do you think is the most essential component of hospitality? And what would be your encouragement to people who maybe are interested in hosting international students, but also who might be afraid of this idea of engaging with someone who is different? I think hospitality and being a host does transcend outside of our home. So what would be your,
Yeah. I'm going to default to one of CHN's core values. So CHN is Canada Homestay Network. That's the name of our company. We have 5 values as an organization, and one of them is giving wholeheartedly. And I think that's the essential component of hospitality. Brene Brown, who I adore, defines wholehearted living as a way of life that involves being authentic, compassionate, and connected to others. It's about living from a place of worthiness and being fully invested in your own life and work and community. Again, we need each other. And I think my encouragement to someone listening would be to say, don't be afraid to engage with someone who looks or sounds different from you. It reminded me too of Maya Angelou. There's a beautiful video of, you could probably find it if you Google like Maya Angelou and rainbows, maybe. Yeah. She says, I've had so many rainbows in my clouds to other people. She said, the thing to do, it seems to me, is to prepare yourself so that you can be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud, somebody who may not look like you, may not call God the same name you call God, if they call God at all, and may not eat the same dishes prepared the way you do, may not dance your dances or speak your language, but be a blessing to somebody. So that to me is the joys of homestay, is to be a blessing to someone, to offer a gift of you and who you are and your connection. Yeah. What else is there?
No, there not much, but it does. But you're right, and I love Maya Angelou, and it visually paints this picture, because I can't imagine anyone. I have not met anyone who like sees a rainbow and was like, "God, stupid rainbow. Why are you here? Oh, those rainbows, they just need to leave. I want that gray cloud." Like, we are wired for that beauty and that difference and that gift and that blessing. And so that's a beautiful way to put it. And yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to encourage other people. Jen, where can people find you if you want to be found again on maybe you don't, maybe social media? Do you have a website? Where can people buy your book? Can you give us a little rundown?
Yeah. So thank you for asking. My website is jenniferrobinwilson.com.
Okay.
And you can find me on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. All of my handles are Jennifer Robin Wilson. And the book can be found wherever you buy books. And I encourage people to support their local independent booksellers.
Yes.
And if you can't find it on the shelves, they'll definitely bring it in for you if you just ask. You can even ask at your library too. I love libraries, and would encourage people to ask the book to be brought into your library if you don't want to buy it. And of course, it can be found on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and Indigo and all those good places too. So it's called The Heart of Homestay. Again, and it's Jennifer Robin Wilson. Thank you.
Awesome. I'll include the link in our show notes. Make sure people can connect to that. Before I let you go, though, Jen, I have to keep with tradition. For those of you who might be new to the podcast, we always end a podcast with a Canadian salad pop quiz. Now, this is a question that I have not prepped Jen on. So she did not. That's the drama and beauty of this. She could not prepare for the answer. So I'm going to ask you a question based on the topic that we discussed about, and we'll see if you win $10 million. I don't have $10 million, but we'll just say the invisible $10 million that you're going to win. So my question to you, Jen, and you might know this, so I might be just shooting myself in the foot. At the end of 2023, how many international students were there in Canada at all levels of study?
Oh, gosh. So that's a great question because it has changed a lot. I'm going to say it was somewhere between 5 and 700,000.
Okay.
It hit 1 million in 2020. Actually, no, it was 2023. It was probably 1 million. I'm going to revise my answer.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay. 1 million? That's your final answer? Okay.
Yes.
Ding, ding, ding. Yes, it was 1,040,985. And this is according to CBIE, which is the Canadian Bureau for International Education.
Yes.
Yes. Excellent. Yeah, there you go. So in 2023, which is a lot. So lots of opportunities for people to get to know other people. And I think students come already with a lot of curiosity because they're here to learn. And maybe you can match that curiosity if you decide to host someone. I think my last question, Jen, and then I'll let you go. We are all a part of this beautiful Canadian salad. Mm-hmm. And I myself like to see myself as a pea in the Canadian salad. I'm a small, crunchy with a little flavor. So that's how I see myself. So if you could envision yourself as a part of the Canadian salad, what kind of fruit, vegetable component of a salad would you see yourself as?
Oh.
We've had hummus on the show. We've had falafel. We've had tomatoes. We haven't had any croutons yet.
I'm going to go out on a limb and say blueberry.
Ooh, yes.
I know. I don't often, but I like fruit in my salad. I regularly put apples in, but a little blueberry is just that little, I love the texture. I love the sweetness. I like the little, what's just a little pop of flavor in your mouth when you're expecting lettuce. Blueberries. That's what I'm going to be.
Okay, I love it. From one pea to one blueberry. Thank you so much, Jen. Honestly, it's been such an honor to have you and to hear your experience and just to hear your perspective from someone who's born and raised in Canada and has opened her home and her heart to so many different cultures and spaces and experiences. I think I'm honored to meet you and know you, and I hope that others can learn more about you and your experience and read your book. Thank you again for joining me. And please, if you're listening and you want to be connected to the Canadian Salad community, you can sign up for our newsletter, Canadian Salad Snacks, where we update people on our most popular episodes. You can get a sneak peek into our new ones, and you can weigh in on what you want to hear us talk about. That's at our website, canadiansalad.ca. You can also find us on Instagram and TikTok. So again, Jen, thank you so much, and we'll talk to everyone next week. Okay.
Thanks,
bye.
Andrea.
Canadian Salad is written and produced in British Columbia, Canada by Hoshin Ho and Andrea McCoy. Theme music is by Naver Avetyan from Pixabay.
This has been a Good Drinklin production.